There are those who dream of possibilities, of a world free of the ancient diseases that keep billions in poverty. And for those who strive to make that dream a reality, their quest is on the brink of victory.
waaw xam nga ñun si dañ juddoo ci dëkk bi yaroo fi màgge fi dex gi nekk suñu wet ay tool wër kër maanaam ay tool yi mango tool yi ñu bayee lëjum ak ay tool yi ceeb kon ñun bu ñu fi xasee dëkk rek toujours dañuy nekk en contact ak ndox kon duñu mën a mucc ci feebar bi waaw man bi ma njëkkee dal ma nemmiku ko ci benn semaine laa ko nemmiku ma xam ni normalement waruma mën a saw deret ma ne peut-être dama gaañu wala affaire yi demee noonu wala ma daanu deret kii sama yaram xaw ma daal comme xaw ma woon lan la mais am na ñi nga xam tey ñu ngi gaañu ñu leen di yóbbu sax te xamuñu lan moo leen rey.
This is the story of a deadly disease and an epidemic that shook the medical world. It is also a story of a remarkable and novel experiment that might just halt it. The Lamsa River is the center of life here, but it has also been the source of a disaster.
so kooku bu ma koy jox garab xaaruma si yaayam ak papaam am na ay xale yoo xam ni bëgguma leen sax fekk seen kër dama leen di invité fii sama kër parce que buñ ko doon xaaj ñetti étape.
Alassane Ndaye is a village health representative who helps control the disease called schistosomiasis, also known as bilharzia. The health crisis started here around 1989, when Alassane was just a boy. Schistosomiasis is a waterborne disease that infects 1 in 3 children in sub-Saharan Africa, and it is spreading up rivers faster than it can be controlled.
ñun xam naa loolu ndax man ay daara la am fii léegi ñu gis xale yi ko dugg fii rek saw deret su ko defee ñu ne kii bilharzia man luy bilharzia ñu ne ci dex gi lañ koy jëlee da nga déglu moom ndax baaxul deret buy génn ci suufu nit baaxul wal muuminaat mais boobu jamono nit ñi dañu wér nit ñi dañu am kattan nit ñi dañu am doole tabaarakallah mais léegi yooyu yëpp amatul.
In 1989, the strain of schistosomiasis that affects the bladder suddenly surged around Lamsa village with no clear explanation. But that was not the worst of the disaster. At the time, Dr. Idrissa Talla worked in a town called Richard Toll, upstream of Lamsa village.
Une après-midi, c'était on se rappelle très bien, le 13 février 1988, il y avait une fille de 8 ans qui habitait Gadalhout, c'est un quartier de Richard Toll, qui avait une diarrhée et on avait essayé de faire un frottis, donc on avait prélevé des selles. Et vers 16 h, le laborantin est venu me voir en tapant à ma porte avec beaucoup d'excitation. Il me dit, mais docteur, j'ai vu quelque chose de très bizarre. Je dis, bizarre, toi tu vois toujours des choses bizarres. Il a insisté. On est allé voir et c'était ce qu'on craignait, mais on n'osait pas le dire.
What they saw was not the familiar bladder schistosomiasis, but a virulent intestinal strain never seen in Senegal before. Within 10 months, over 70% of the population of Richard Toll was infected, and it was spreading fast.
les gens étaient vraiment malades. Ils avaient mal à la tête, ils avaient mal au ventre, ils avaient une diarrhée et ils avaient même de la fièvre.
The Lamsar is a branch of a great river system called the Senegal Basin, which stretches across 4 West African countries. Up to 3.5 million people live in the basin and depend on its rivers for their water. Suddenly, they were all at risk.
On avait peur puisque on se trouvait devant quelque chose qu'on n'osait même pas dire, puisque les experts avaient dit que ça n'aurait pas existé. Et on s'était rendu compte qu'au bout de 2 ans, 1 année, 2 ans, il y avait une évolution exponentielle. Donc toute la zone était malade en vérité.
mënuñ service ba ci ñuy retraité am na wante benn problème mësuñu ko am tàng bi lu ko am barsi bu mu amee fii bouché yàqu ñun bokk ci li ñu am jàngoro ji am dugg ci dex gi.
What had caused this outbreak? In 1986, the Diama Dam was built across the Senegal River to boost agriculture in the river basin. It stopped the river's flow near the sea, and this was the start of the problem. Locals remember that after the dam was completed, schistosomiasis surged.
jàmmoon ni bay ñu seen napp ci lekk di ci róog mais ndax gi il est bouché ci daan liggéey waaye ndax naa yàlla ñuy feebar wante mosuñu jël feebar.
Consider the impact of this one small dam on the population of the river above it. It was absolutely devastating. In a matter of 18 to 24 months, villages that had never had intestinal schistosomiasis went up to 90% prevalence. 90% of every man, woman, and child in the village was infected.
The dam that was built to boost development virtually stopped it for the rural poor.
Schisto causes stunted growth. Schisto causes low physical performance. Schisto makes you feel sick. How do you expect development to be successful at ending poverty if the people are sick? There's something called the poverty trap, and schistosomiasis is the biggest element in it. It really boils down to education. If you can finish school, you're going to do pretty well in life. If you have schistosomiasis, it's not likely that you'll finish school.
On sent qu'ils ont maigri, qu'ils souffrent, et ils peuvent vous souffler comme quoi ils pissent du sang. Pratiquement ceux qui sont atteints de bilharziose, on sent que vraiment ils chutent dans leur travail. On voit une baisse de niveau, un rendement faible par rapport à ce qu'ils donnaient, quoi. Surtout, tu vois même des gosses qui sont très bien, mais dès qu'ils ont la maladie, vraiment, tu sens que leur performance diminue.
It's a chronic disease. It does not kill people today. It kills people later. But consider this, 75% of the people in the Senegal River Basin have schistosomiasis today. You won't have economic development until that problem is under control. It's already been proven. It takes a very small effect at the sick level. If you fix that problem, you have a gigantic effect on economic development.
The clue to how the dam caused this devastating outbreak lies in the complicated life cycle of schistosomiasis. Like other parasites, it is a marvel of evolution. It has survived over millions of years by lurking in rivers waiting for someone to enter the water.
So what you see wiggling around, it's like a fluttering wiggle, is the schistosome itself. This is exactly how they would be if you could see them in the water. So they flutter around like that and then find a human, which is what they're looking for, and burrow their way right into the skin with that fluttering motion.
This is an actual larva about to penetrate human skin.
It's like a cycle of disaster. Those little larvae enter your body. They lose their tail when they penetrate the skin. They travel through the bloodstream and lodge either in the liver or the bladder and reproduce. They wrap themselves up together and start making eggs. And the schistosome pair is going to make around 400 eggs a day. Some of the eggs get lodged in the organ where they're stuck. And the rest of them get eliminated by the body in urine or stool.
On contact with river water, the eggs hatch into microscopic larvae that seek out freshwater snails in which to grow and multiply into thousands of human-infecting organisms. In the Senegal Basin, the dam slowed the water flow and created a vastly expanded habitat for snails. More snails meant a greater risk of infection, and across the river basin, the snail population erupted. So a solution was required that did more than treat the symptoms. It had to deal with snails. Just downstream of Lamsar village is a water point choked with reeds and aquatic grass, an ideal breeding ground for snails.
ndax fii Lamsar dafa yàgg nekk foyer wu villageoise depuis bi ko barrage bi ñëw indi affaire bi ba léegi xor yooyu dañ fi bëri woon.
Alassane and a research team collect snails. A set of timed capture periods ensures accurate comparisons between weekly collections.
8e point.
We do two things. We follow the humans and we follow snails because the humans get schisto from snails. So every week we go to the water points of the villages and we collect snails. We bring them back to the lab and see if they're infected or not. 13. We wash them in distilled water, not tap water because the chlorine could kill them. Then we put each snail that can spread schisto under the light for half an hour. And at that point, we'll look at them in the microscope one by one, and we'll be able to see the cercariae, the larvae of the infected snails.
The intense light mimics the midday sun, the time of day that snails shed the deadly schistosomiasis larvae. It also happens to be the time when people escape the baking heat to cool off in the river.
We look to see which snails are shedding the larvae, because you can see them wiggling around in there. So then we know what % of the snails are infected.
Amadou is one of the children who raised his hand in the classroom.
danga koy yëg sa yaram boo commencé di liggéey ba sa yaram tàng bu sa yaram tàngee boo ñëwee danga koy yëg nu muy metti sa yaram.
li nga daan liggéeyee dootoo ko liggéeyee boo liggéeyee tuuti rek da ngay yëg ni yow da nga commencé sonn te sûrement bilharzia bi bu jógee si yow si lay def noonu. boo xoolee bu wàññee ko si yow parce que boo xoolee li ngay liggéey da ngay xool par rapport ak bi muy nekk si yow.
te sama papa suy liggéey dara dama ko si war jàppale bu baax a baax liggéey tool metti na sax te boo jàppale du ma jàppalewul sama papa du baax amul kenn ku dul man.
Amadou and his father work a small allotment where they grow rice. The dam brought water for irrigation, but these irrigation canals extend the reach of the disease.
boo demee si dex gi moom dina gis wante yow doo ko gis da lay dugg dina dugg te yow doo ko gis nga dem commencé saw deret fekk villageois bi fekk villageois bi dugg na ndax yaa ngi dem si naaj bu tànga bi.
In an attempt to control the disease, the World Health Organization recommends that every child in affected areas receives a free dose of the drug praziquantel once a year.
léegi nag man leen gravité maladie ak lu mu metti muñal nga jël sa garab parce que moo lay faj.
It's not the first time Amadou has had to take the drug. He has lived with schistosomiasis for some time.
garab yi dafa weex dafa ma doon def ay genre miir dangay miir danga koy bëgg a wàcc te doo ko wàcc.
Another part of Alassana's job as health representative is to ensure that all children get their treatment.
dama xool ci microscope yi gis feebar bi ni affaire bi doxee ku ko xam war nga ci yee doomu aadama yi te loolu laa dëkkee léegi daanaka ma ni defatuma lenn lu dul di sensibiliser par rapport ak feebar bi su ma amee ñu ma jox garab sax guddi gi jot jaral na ma topp guddi su ma amee liste bi xam ni tey ñii laa war a traité du ma tëdd ci lal te traité wu ma leen.
The number of pills a child needs is determined by their height.
Maguette naa li di leen informer ku bañ jël garab sax naa garab bi neexul dama lay force léeg-léeg sax damay ji dóoru doomu jàmbur pour mu jël garab. jënd sama ay bonbon jënd affaire yooyu jox leen man maa leen di nax ba joxal leen sama bopp garab gi parce que xam naa ni.
Bigger children need to swallow a number of pills in a single dose, a tough challenge for some.
waaw am na ñoo xam ne moom duñ ko naan dañ koy sànni bu leen ko joxee duñ ko naan dañ koy dem ba sa àll ba sànni ko fa dem seen yoon soo waxee ñu naan nan ko te fekk naa moom bu dul loolu boo màggalee moom dangay dee loolu baaxul garab bi la jos baaxul.
Yet even if they do manage to get the pills down, it is not enough to keep them free of the disease.
The only drug that we have kills the worms inside you, but it won't prevent you from getting reinfected tomorrow when you go to wash the dishes or 3 days later when you go to swim. 30 years later, there's actually no cure.
Le protocole, il ne me semble pas adapté à la situation actuelle. Quand on a toute une population qui est malade, passer une seule fois par an ne me paraît pas suffisant.
But distribution of even a single dose a year seems impossible. Only a small percentage of the millions of people who need praziquantel get it.
The biggest problem I think that anybody faces in trying to treat or control schistosomiasis is the scale of the disease. It is everywhere. The Senegal River Basin itself is larger than the UK. It's huge. So imagine trying to find small communities of 5 households spread out all over the landscape. It's tragic. They can't distribute praziquantel in any meaningful way, I'm sorry to say it, but in Senegal, 15% of the people at risk actually get the treatment.
Elizabeth was convinced that there was a completely different solution to the problem, and the clue was back at the dam wall. Budge Boye and his sons live by fishing in the estuary below the dam wall. Like his father before him, Budge fishes for prawns, a once abundant species. Now they're difficult to find. Before the dam, prawns thrived upstream in thousands of kilometers of fresh waterway and only migrated to the salty estuary to lay their eggs. Budge only finds prawns against the dam wall. He's convinced they can smell the sweet water on the riverside.
mais boo seetee booru barrage bi toujours ndox mu neex mi bu ñëwee comme ni ñu yokkee ni barrage day ñëw léegi lu mu indaale rek léegi du nangu sore booru ndox mu neex bi parce que day bëgg a delluwaat waaw dañuy wër léegi ñoom bu ñu duggsee rek léegi bu ñu duggsee léegi dañuy wër que ça soit bu ñu wëree ba gis ñu fu ñu dugg si biir xeer yi si xeer yu ñu àndoon si suuf ñu dugg foofu parce que day am toujours ndox mu neex.
The prawn's life cycle involves needing to go to salt water to reproduce. The female only migrates. It goes to estuaries, lays its eggs there, and then she and the larva move back up the river. That's the natural cycle. Because the dam prevented them from reaching their breeding ground, the species became extinct above the wall of the Diama Dam.
Could it be that the prawns are the missing link between the building of the dam and the disease it triggered?
They knew the dam caused schisto. They knew that. We know that dams cause schistosomiasis. But how does it cause schistosomiasis? We've discovered that by removing the predator of the snail population exploded. The prawn disappeared, the snail population exploded, the disease exploded. So bringing back the prawn is like understanding the mechanism of disease. You understand the mechanism of infection, you bring in the predator back to control that snail population, and you can control schisto.
Elizabeth's solution lies outside a medical approach. She plans to bring prawns back into the river. But a dam wall sits between a good idea and its realization. Ever since the Diama Dam was built 30 years ago, the people of the Senegal River Basin have been ravaged by schistosomiasis, also known as bilharzia.
When the dam was built, the river prawn, which is a migratory species, disappeared from above the dam. That allowed the snail population to explode, and once the interaction between humans started happening and the infection was present, just exploded.
In 2012, Elizabeth started Project Crevette to test a theory that prawns could solve the schisto problem. The project aims to measure how effective they are in getting rid of the snails that are host to the parasite in the river. But first, she and local health worker Alassane Ndaye run a trial at a small test site at Lamsar village.
Because this is a migratory species, we thought, well, how are we going to keep them there? So we built an enclosure around the water point.
The water point is used by over 800 people. If just a few individuals urinate in the water, it will keep the cycle of infection going.
What's interesting about this parasite is that it can actually change the behavior of the human, and give the human the urge to pee when the human is up deep in the water, because the parasite wants to survive. It wants to get in the water to hatch the egg.
These are hundreds of swimming larvae that hatched when infected urine was mixed with water in a laboratory. When the project started, almost every snail at the test site was infected. Elizabeth will need hundreds of prawns if her idea is to work. And so it is to a river more than 3,500 kilometers away that she must go to find them. The Lobe River is much the same as the Senegal River was before the dam was built. Like the fishermen in Senegal, Mabene Mlangina traps prawns, but there is no dam here and so they are abundant.
Elles sortent la nuit pour chercher à manger. Elles sont là. J'ai trouvé mes grands-parents en train de pêcher les crevettes. C'est quelque chose qu'on fait de génération en génération. Ça se mange à Kribi comme ailleurs. Les femmes qui font le commerce sortent d'ailleurs pour venir acheter, aller revendre.
Mabene has caught 300 and kept them alive for Elizabeth. These prawns occur in rivers along the entire West African coastline.
Why are we restoring this animal that has to migrate to reproduce? Why don't we bring in some other prawn that reproduces in freshwater that will do the same job? And the reason is that we really are dedicated to restoring biodiversity. We're restoring indigenous species. It's the best thing to do.
In the Lobe River, the prawn life cycle hasn't been interrupted. Not even a waterfall will stop them from climbing up to fresh water after they have bred in the river mouth. Even tiny juveniles propel themselves upstream by hopping from rock pool to rock pool.
Under natural conditions, this prawn would migrate 1,500 kilometers upriver. Its range is 1,500 kilometers. So it's actively traveling up and down the river all the time. We're really worried about the cost of air freight because the most expensive aspect of shipping fish is the weight of the water that you have to ship them in. Makes me kind of nervous because it's a really, really long journey. It's 4 or 5 hours from here to Douala, a 7-hour flight, time on the ground, and then another 5 hours to Saint Louis before we even get to take them out of the boxes, and then we still have to transport them to the river to release them. So there can be casualties.
The plane lands at 2 in the morning, 18 hours after the prawns left the Lobe River.
There's always a risk that it won't work, but we're trying very hard to do it. I don't think this is a crazy idea. I think we're doing it in the most responsible way that we can.
Up next is a long road trip to Saint Louis and then onto the river. Dawn and the last leg to the water point at Lamsa. The entire trip has taken 26 hours. A third of the prawns have not survived the journey from Cameroon. Alassane gently transfers what's left of the precious predators to their new environment.
boole biñ ma boole ci liggéey bi nag dafa mel ne nag sama loxo léegi fu nekk lay dem ci wàllu liggéey su fekkente ñi dañuy defar enclos bi nga xam si dañuy def crevettes yi maa ngi ci biir liggéey bi bu ñu demee aussi tam ba ñuy def crevettes yi ci dex gi man maay entretien enclos bi man maay jël ay meeb di ko def ci piège yi ñu fa def di xool ndax crevettes yi ñoo ngi fi wala nekkuñu.
A lot rests on the success of Project Crevette. Not only is schistosomiasis infecting those who enter the river, but 30 years after the construction of the dam, a new disaster is starting to be felt. Cancer and organ failure are killing young adults who have grown up with chronic schistosomiasis. Imam Adama Diagne lost a son to the disease.
Sum xal nekku ci boobu feebar mu nekk ci moom yaayam moo ko turee moo ne moom kii na nga xool biir bi dafa jóg yàgg na ndax feebaru biir la woon yàgg na ci moom mais man xaw ma ci dara ba mu mujj biir bi dafa jóg mais bu mu demee ba mu débb ko hôpital ñoo ma xamal ne feebar bii du wér waaw moom lañ ma waxoon nañ ne cancer.
Doctors had not been making the link between chronic schistosomiasis and its eventual consequences, but Alassane and other local health workers noticed the connection.
bi ma yëgee loolu moo gën a touché parce que ñoom moom day wax ni cancer la rek mais man am naa njort ni dex gi ak feebar bi si ne moom moo ko def noonu xam nga kooku sax xalaat na mais am na ñi nga xam tey ji ñu ngi gaañ ñu leen di yóbbu sax te xamuñu lan moo leen rek loolu dañ naan infection la rek c'est tout court te duñu wax ni au juste village ndax li ma gën a metti mooy ñun fii nit ki dina feebar ba génn àdduna ay docteur nekk fi te duñu wax carrément nit ki yow lii moo la rey.
Cancer is taking young adults in their prime. All along the river there are stories of loss. Koura Gaye also lost her son to the disease.
bu mu demee bay tool di def bak feebar bi bàyyi ko ba mujj gi mu téye benn bët bi ba mujj gi daal nii la nekkee ba keroog mu gaañu bu mu gaañoo nag kanam gi nee nañ dafa mel na pot ndaa la toll yooyu yëpp dafa manifesté woon ci feebar bi mu sonaloon ko lool ba mujj gi daal rek yàlla def li gën nag waaye seenu mu woon ni sax booba dina gaañ ci feebar bi.
Back at the Richard Toll Hospital, where the crisis was first recognized, Dr. Talla alerts doctors to the link between schistosomiasis and the epidemic of organ failure and cancer. It's a crisis that adds to the burden of those who have already suffered the disease for years.
Au niveau de Ndombo. Alors donc on va procéder à l'examen échographique sur le foie, voir s'il y a eu Faites des complications hépatiques ou non de la bilharziose. Voilà.
Ah, on va regarder pour voir s'il y a une hépatomégalie déjà. Là, une flèche hépatique qui est à 14 cm. Une éventuelle hépatopathie.
Ce qui permet également, 25 ans après la description du premier cas de bilharziose intestinale, de pouvoir vraiment apprécier malheureusement les conséquences, donc toutes les complications. Nous venons de voir dans les registres personnes qui présentent un cancer de la vessie, des cirrhoses. C'est une situation qu'il faudrait vraiment aussi prendre à bras le corps. Donc, c'est en fait ça par rapport à l'impact réellement de la schisto, le delta. Donc il faudrait adapter la réponse à la nouvelle situation. Ça.
أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة الله أكبر
mais benn feebar bu yàlla indi na taf na ci loo xam ne bu ko gisee bu ko xamee rek loolu mun a dindi feebaram ci réew mi moom feebaru cancer bari na fi trop xaw ma nag fan lay jóge bi dugg ci nit ñi feebaru cancer moom bari na waaw moo tax man léegi ku mu dégg biiram ngi métti rek mu tiit defe ne moom la ku mu yëg biiram ngi métti rek damay dal ci dem baadu moom ban feebar la ñun feebar la boo xam bi daal ci dex gi la ko jël moo tax ma leen sànq nag feebar boobu ñëw ci dex gi yàlla moo ko indi te it yàlla moo ci tofal ñu koy dindi dégg moo tax ma leen sànq li ku di daa indi dawa feebar boo gis yàlla tofal na ko dindi mais dénk dul xam rek mais yàlla tofal benn rek yàlla tofal mooy dee moom kenn mënu ko dindi.
At regular intervals, Alassane runs a test to check how effective the prawns at the water point have been.
dama yeewu 6 heures du matin récupérer pot yi ñu yóbbu ko labu bu dee urine bu dee sel bu ñu paree tamit ba ñu génne foofu résultat xool ñi feebar ñi Tidiane Diomaye Dièye Rokhaya Ndiaye.
Children swim all day, all year, except when they're in school. They're in the water, and you can't blame them because the temperature is 100 degrees. You know, it's impossible to keep people out of the river, and we wouldn't want to. That's their culture. The river is like a recreational center, a leisure center for the whole village.
If the prawns are eating the snails at the test site, the urine specimens will indicate a drop in infection. But the results are better than expected.
It was absolutely stunning to realize that in 6 months you could reverse a 30-year-old problem that's been completely out of control. The prawns eat the snails, transmission is completely dampened.
A consequence of this drop in infection is visible at the annual wrestling tournament, which pits boys from Lamsa against those of other regions. To win is to bring honor to a village. In the past, Lamsa had struggled to put a team together. But today, Alassane watches a healthy young villager compete and win his bout. So if reinfection is dropping, how can this trend be extended into the river basin's thousands of kilometers of waterways? Project Crevette's strategy to restock the whole river basin with prawns is a hatchery. But these West African prawns have never been bred in captivity before.
One of the most challenging aspects of this health program is nothing about health at all. It's about breeding the prawn in captivity in an aquaculture setting. It's never been done before. It's a huge challenge to get it right, and to get it right in a way that can be replicated here in Senegal.
fan yooyu bu ñuy def pêche bi di leen xool dañ leen di gis mais su yàggee dañuy gis ni dafay mel ni dafa am mortalité dañuy gën a wàññiku maanaam départ bi ma doon gis fukk par bis day dem di dem ba par benn laay gis wala par ñaar ce qui veut dire que daañ fi nekk mais xëy na condition ndox mi ni mel xëy na peut-être moom moo tax.
It really only works after the third generation that they adapt themselves to the conditions of a hatchery so that they're producing at the levels of nature. So it's a very, very painful process of trial, getting to the point where you finally get the first crop. Eventually, we should be able to release about 10,000 a month. That's not a lot in aquaculture terms. But it's completely irresponsible to release that many prawns into the river knowing that they can't reproduce.
And so, it's back to where the problem started in the first place. The dam wall cannot be wished away, but there is a tried and tested solution that works elsewhere. Environmentalists in other parts of the world have built fish ladders to allow salmon and other species to maintain their migrations. But in Africa, there are many dams and few fish ladders. At the Diama Dam, Elizabeth meets Adama Au, the engineer in charge. She hopes to convince him that restoring the health of people upstream is in his hands.
Si on faisait une espèce de passe pour les crevettes sur la digue, en dessous du goudron, je pense.
C'est quoi? C'est juste une sorte de...
J'ai même un petit dessin. Alors moi, j'avais pensé, mais ça c'est juste une idée à moi, quoi, de faire
le passage, quoi.
Oui. Et ça, les crevettes vont monter et descendre.
Ils vont rentrer par là et puis sortir par là.
Oui. Point de vue...
faisabilité?
Oui.
À mon avis, ça c'est faisable. Hein?
OK.
Seulement...
Parce que comme ça, on n'a pas à faire avec le barrage du tout. C'est juste quelque chose qui se passe à côté. Mais il faut de l'électricité, c'est tout.
Techniquement, si c'est faisable, oui. Nous, modestement, on va apporter peut-être quelques observations sur ça.
Oui.
Et une fois que cette étape-là est finie, maintenant, c'est une décision politique.
So there's one more challenge. The Diama Dam is jointly operated by 4 different countries. All will have to agree that the prawn ladder is a good idea.
We need to understand that wherever dams are built, it will have a negative consequence on the environment and on human health. I think the dam builders need to assume the responsibility to fix the problem that they're creating.
Yeah, it's my job. When I show you, it's my job. You put that, you take all. And this, it is for this.
With articulated legs.
The idea of prawns is catching on, and perhaps for good reason. "18 months into the project, and a new round of tests reveals that less than 6% of Lamsa's school children show any signs of schistosomiasis. The prawns have done their work.
loolu daal nekk na lu ma yëg daal que ni relève boobu ñun ñoo ko yor fi mu toll gis nga loolu keroog bi ma si waxtaan ak borom dëkk bi man ko jamono bi yëpp ñoo ngi seet waaye gisatuñu xor bu am doomu jàngoro bi mais bi ma ko waxee dama ma lii sant yàlla la ndax bu ñu xoolee bi ñuy door fukki xor yu ñu jël presque juróom-ñett yi am nañu feebar ndax fii Lamsar dafa yàgg nekk foyer wu bilharzia.
And down at Lamsar's test site, there's a small celebration.
We have not had an infected snail at this site for the last 8 months. It's phenomenal. We don't need to change people's homes. We don't need to change people's lives to end schistosomiasis. We can end schisto today with the prawns and praziquantel. Think of the children. Think of development in the future. If you can come with a solution that controls the snails and treats the disease, which we have both in hand, you can change people's lives without changing their culture. And you're restoring their environment too. It's not our job to tell people to stop swimming in the river. It's our job to make the water clean.
ci seetal dex gi ak defi crevettes yi ñu dagg chaîne de transmission bi dañuy yaakaar ni kon loolu dafay waaj a réussir mu nekk lu nga xam ne sant yàlla la bu nga xam ne mais ñoom dañ ma indiwaat mel na dañ ma sololaat benn mbubu parce que xam naa ni ñoom jeexal nañ ku dem ba am 70 ans yu teg damay xam ne ñoom jeexal nañ mais kun ñun ñoo war a taxaw léegi toppatoo askan wi ñun tamit suñu wàll ba la ñu fi jóge loolu daal nekk na lu ma yëg daal